Hi everybody, welcome to art class. I'm Mary Jo, and today we are going to be working on watercolor. So if you've always wondered what are the best watercolor palettes, how do I use these, what kind of paper should I use, what about those watercolor pencils? This is the right video for you. So get out your paints and brushes and here we go. For watercolor, you are going to need brushes. So I don't want you to have to go out and buy anything new, but if you are, look for watercolor brushes. They're a little bit softer than brushes for acrylic painting, but if this is what you have at home, feel free to use it. Make sure you don't have crusty, hardened brushes though, because watercolor doesn't like that very much. You'll need a small brush and maybe a medium-sized brush, but whatever you have will work. You also need watercolors. So this is watercolor pencils, and these are really cool because they work like color pencils, but then you can add water to them. So I highly suggest these. Then whatever type of watercolor palettes you have will do. These are the I don't even know what brand ones, doesn't matter, but you know, any of the brands that you have used in school will work. They also make watercolors that are liquid in a tube, and you can squeeze them out. If you purchase those and you purchase a palette with a lid, you can put dots of the color on there and it can dry out, and then you can wake it up just like you wake up these. And so I'll remind you how to do that. And then last but not least, you need some watercolor paper. And the reason why there is special paper for watercolor is because it's a little bit heavier and it allows you to use water on it. If you just use regular paper, like out of your printer or drawing paper, it might not like the water very much. It might wrinkle. And also watercolor paper often comes in a block. So it's all glued together and you can leave it like that while you paint and it stays very flat. Don't have to do that. You could take the piece off and then also you can tape it down with masking tape. So you need your brushes, your paper, and your paints, and I'll also show you how to use watercolor pencils. Okay, so a couple of other things that you'll need are some water for your painting. And the other thing is it's always good to have a paper towel handy. So to get started, just a couple of tricks and tips here. We are going to start by getting these paints ready. So this is kind of an old set that we had laying around here. This brush is really no good. I'm going to toss that. And I will use this nice soft white brush. This is a watercolor brush, but again, like I said, it's okay to use brushes that are not watercolor brushes. They just make sure they're not too stiff. So you're going to grab some of your water and put some water on each color. Try not to mix colors into each other. So once you get purple on the brush, that's what the paper towel's for. So we're waking up those paints. And it's interesting to see, like, this is actually, it had some orange in it, so it came off as orange first, but it is brown. And don't be shy, put some drips in there. You can, even if you had an eyedropper, you could eyedrop the water in. That would be interesting. All right. Yellow is looking a little muddy here, but the color comes out pretty nice. I don't know exactly what happened there. These have been around the house for a while. So sometimes with these palettes, it takes a little extra to wake them up. So I'm going to give each one a little drink. Don't be shy. You know, just because these paints have been sitting around, that's exactly what happens with the wet watercolors in the tubes. You can actually let the blobs of paint dry up on your palette, and then you have nice fresh watercolor paints. So these are all absorbing the water and getting ready for us to paint. So once you're all ready, we will get started. Okay, so our paints are ready. So there are two techniques that I want to show you. I'm going to show you wet on wet and a dry technique. Wet on wet is pretty much everybody's favorite. So you need your watercolor paper all set for yourself. And we are going to just scooch these paints over here and put the water over there. And this up there. I'm going to make 2 circles on my watercolor paper to show these 2 techniques, at least for now. We might end up making more circles later. And all right, so wet on wet is exactly what it sounds like. The first thing you're going to do is wet the paper with water. Any pencil line that you paint over with water in watercolor, you won't be able to erase. So that is something important to note, especially because watercolor works in layers, and whenever you want a lighter area of the paint, you leave more of the paper showing. So you actually use the white of the paper for painting. So get this good and saturated with just clean water. And I just got started, so my water is very clean, but if you had a lot of paint in this water, you would want to get yourself some clean water. At least if you want pure colors. Depends what you're after. So nice to have a paper towel around. And then let's bring our friend the paints in. And like I said, wet on wet is exactly what it sounds like. And the paint, you want your paint to be nice and juicy so that it can almost like drip in there. Because what it does is it lets the color spread. But the paint will only go where the water goes. So I filled in the circle with paint or with water. And so let's try another color. So if I do red, maybe next to it I'll do a yellow. And then we'll see what happens. I'll move that around a little bit so we get some mixture. Let me give you one shot of a dark color so that you can really see it on the camera. And if you have too much water, it sort of sits in pools, but as that dries, it'll do cool things. And so you can also, like use the end of your paintbrush to move this around a little bit so it's really starting to swirl and whirl. So, and the thing about watercolor is it's easy to make it muddy quickly. So that wet on wet is good. I don't want to do anything else there because it will start to get really muddy. And once it dries, you can always put more on top. So that's our first technique, wet on wet watercolor. Okay, so for our next technique, we are going to turn on the lights a bit. There we go. And we are going to do a dry technique. So this circle is dry. And it's exactly what it sounds like. You're going to put the wet watercolor on top of dry paper. And it's important to let it dry in between before adding other colors. So let's do the entire circle one color. And for this middle part, I'm going to leave it so that we can overlap another color. So I'm filling the circle with blue. Now, if I touch this area that's still wet from before, it will blend. So we need to be mindful of that. And to make this smooth, you have to work pretty quickly so that the watercolor doesn't start to dry and soak into the paper. For a space this large, a larger brush might be better, but this is what I'm using. And another technique that you can do is to wet the paper and then use one color, and you can make a really smooth surface that way. It really depends what you're going for. So that's my single layer of blue. As you can see, you can still see the pencil line. So that will be something that we'll paint over, but if you are doing a drawing, say that you did a drawing and you drew clouds in the sky, and then you decided to paint blue over them, you would not be able to erase that pencil. But for something like clouds, you'll use the white of the paper. While we're waiting for that to dry, I am going to show you how to do a nice smooth area. So again, you'll wet your paper just like before, but this is more of a wash, a single wash. So you still want it to be pretty wet, but I actually am kind of making sure there's no puddles. And then I'll do this in purple. And I make sure my purple paint is really juicy so that when I go on here, I can do a wash of the same color. And you can do a gradient wash where it goes from dark to light, and you do that by using less paint and more water. So like that. And then if you really want it to blend this way, make sure you clean your brush between every stroke so that you don't put more purple into the clear area. So we'll just keep it like that so you can see the difference. So on this side, we have paint brush strokes, which is one effect, and this side there are less brush strokes. But either way, they both are using a wash. So you put the water down first and then add your paint. Okay, so our last step here in our techniques is to layer a color on top of this area. And we are going to do that by, this is dry to the touch. If you need it to dry faster, a lot of times you can use a hair dryer, but on this, if I used a hair dryer, it would start to move. So you just have to keep that in mind. And now I think I'll layer, since I used blue, I'm going to layer this yellow. Hopefully you can see it well. Kind of this paint looks dirtier than it comes out on the, just test. That's a little greenish because it's got another color mixed into it, but that's okay. All right, make sure we have enough water and that our paint is running, flowing, and then it's picking up some of the blue. If it was completely dry, if I waited a while, it wouldn't do that as much. But if you can see, it is mixing to make a green. And then I'm just going to clean off some of this water so that you can really see that. Another way to show this is to do areas of color this way. And so here's like a dry brush where using the paint, watercolor paint, a little more like acrylic where it's a little thicker on the brush. And then you can move through the other color this way. This is tending to take off the other paint underneath. So those are your couple of techniques. I suggest waiting till this is a little more dry to add another color. Thanks for watching my videos. Don't forget to hit the little bell icon down there to subscribe and put a likes for me. It always helps and allows me to make more videos for you. Thank you.